When I made my first video analyzing the Final Fantasy XVI trailer, I primarily used the evidence from the most detailed clues that I could find in that video, with those clues being the words used in scattered remnants of dialogue. I further used my knowledge of those words to extrapolate information based on the etymology of those words. I am a linguophile, a lover of languages, and creating that video got me thinking about the previous entries in the Final Fantasy series. What other information can we gather by just looking at the names of important characters within the Final Fantasy series? Well, the results I found and how I interpret them are more telling than one might think. In this video, I will reveal the etymological secrets of the names of important characters from the Final Fantasy series, from the first game all the way to the most recent game. For the sake of brevity, I will only make mention of notable protagonist and antagonist names, as I can already see this video being several hours long if I were to extrapolate further than that. I should also mention that I will only speak about what I consider to be the true canonical games, so no MMOFF games or sequels, with one exception. Please keep in mind that this information will contain spoilers about the plot of each Final Fantasy game, so proceed at your own risk, or just skip over the games that you don't want spoiled for you. And with that said, I hope you enjoy my findings. In the first Final Fantasy, our heroes are nameless. Wow, that was easy. So that just leaves the Archfiends as well as Garland. I'm going to let the Archfiends slide as well. I think that user Final Fantasy Union provides an in-depth explanation of the 4 Archfiends, so I will link this user's videos explaining them in the description. As for Garland, well, we can provide some interesting interpretation of this antagonist's name. Originating from the 14th century, garland is the Anglo-Latin word that can mean a wreath of flowers, as well as a crown of gold or silver. And this word came from the Frankish frequentative word, with frequentative meaning a gerund, is called veron, which means to adorn or to wear. Veron, furthermore, comes from the Proto-Germanic word vei, which means to turn or twist. So with all of this information, we can interpret the name of Final Fantasy's first villain to embody a presence that is gold and twisting, which, at face value, does not make much sense. But after playing through the game, one comes to understand that this villain, who is the first and final boss, is defeated in the beginning of the game, only to be sent 2,000 years into the past by the Archfiends, when Garland is in his prime as the Archdemon Chaos. And this creates a time loop that effectively grants Chaos immortality. Notice how Chaos's sprite is adorned with gold and silver accents. Chaos is a Greek word that means formless matter, as well as disorder. Chaos is also the primary conflict set inside of each Final Fantasy game, as all villains in the Final Fantasy series ultimately want to achieve total annihilation, or ruin in some way, shape, or form. The main protagonist of Final Fantasy II is Firion. This name gets its roots from the Greek word phyro, which means confusion, as well as the Chimera word phyron, which means rain. So, a reign of confusion. Awesome. The only credence I am able to give this name's origin is the fact that Final Fantasy II begins with a battle that the character is meant to lose. If you have any supporting evidence for the origin of the name Firion, please let me know. On a more interesting note, we have Emperor Matthias Palamisia. Matthias is an ecclesiastic word originating from Hebrew to mean gift of God. This name is actually where we get the contemporary name Matthew from. Palamisia is a word that may derive from Palatium, one of the 7 hills of Rome. Palamisia means castle or fortified structure, which makes sense, considering that Palamisia Castle is a large and fortified structure. The Emperor is capable of powerful magic, as witnessed by the cyclone he creates to rain terror over the world of Final Fantasy II. After his defeat, Emperor Palamisia conquers all of Hell, returning as a more powerful demon who is hell-bent, pun intended, on reigning over the world. It is no surprise that with a literal name meaning gift of God, fortified structure, that this villain would be capable of transcending death and blending the metaphysical realm of death into the physical realm after dying. Sounds like a real Dio Brando, if you catch my drift. Our hero from Final Fantasy III is Luneth, which takes its roots from Luna, the Latin word for moon. Now keep this explanation in mind, because it's important for later. The name has a meaning of duality, as it pertains to one of the antagonists from Final Fantasy III, The moon is a satellite of the Earth that is constantly half-shrouded in darkness. Despite this, the moon always reflects the light of the sun. Our false antagonist is named Xande, which is Portuguese for Alexander. Alexander quite literally means defender of men in Greek, rooting from the word Alexandros. This name also has a dual meaning, as Xande was gifted by the great magus Noah to have mortality, and he reacted poorly to the reception of this gift by attempting to drain the crystals of their power, succeeding with the earth and water crystals, and causing darkness to envelop the world, and all of time to freeze, with the exception of the floating continent, where the fire and wind crystals were protected. Instead of being a protector of all men, Xande squandered his powers in the interest of self-preservation. His defeat reveals the true antagonist, Cloud of Darkness, whose intent is to bring about the advent of imbalance, offset by the four warriors of dark 2,000 years previously, and to return all existence to nothingness. So, Lunith's name, pertaining to the moon, articulates the struggle that the world of Final Fantasy III has every 2,000 years. The world's balance was restored by warriors of darkness, just like the moon is half covered by darkness at all times. And Lunith represents this in addition to the moon's half that always reflects light in order to restore the world's balance with the light needed to defeat Cloud of Darkness. Cecil Harvey is our hero from Final Fantasy IV. Cecil comes from the Welsh name Cecilt, which means blind to one's own beauty. Cecil's last name, Harvey, is derived from the Old Breton name for battle-worthy or blazing iron. With these clues, we can interpret the inner struggle faced by Cecil during the first half of this game. Cecil, at first, is a dark knight who is misguided into performing evil deeds for Kanyazo, the archfiend impersonating Cecil's late adoptive father, the King of Baron. After the ordered destruction of Mysidia, as well as the Village of Mist, Cecil, under the guidance of the Mysidian Elder, is challenged to become a paladin. When he succeeds at this task, our hero sheds his dark past and becomes a warrior of light. He begins to recognize his inner beauty, or his potential to be good. Furthermore, later in the story, Cecil realizes that he is half Lunarian, a race from the stars with the goal of cohabitating with all life that already exists on the blue planet, once the appropriate time is reached. It is through Cecil's journey that our hero blazes or forges himself to overcome his personal struggles and defeat the evil Lunarian Zemus. Golbez, another false antagonist, was originally named Theodore, which is Greek for gift from God. The etymology behind the name Golbez is fairly interesting. His name is actually a mistranslation from Japanese to English. The name Golbez was meant to be Golubaisar, but was accidentally changed to Golbeza because both of these names share the same spelling in katakana. A Golubaisar is a type of venomous black fly, rumored to be born from the body of a decomposing dragon. Zemus actually makes mention of this reference when he possesses Theodore, after the birth of Cecil. Another interesting piece of trivia is that Golbez's HP when fighting Zemus at the end of FF4 is 2,943. Which can be read in Japanese as Nikushimi, or hatred. Golbez's starting HP in Final Fantasy IV The After Years is 2,971, which reads in Japanese as Tsunagai, or atonement. The name Zemus hails from the Amharic language, an ancient language, which is fitting, considering that he belongs to an ancient race. The word Zemus means prayer, which is also fitting, as it was Zemus's goal to enslave all life on the blue planet due to the perception that these life forms were inferior to Lunarian life forms. When Zemus is defeated, his hatred lives on in the form of Zeromus, which can be taken to quite literally mean no prayer. The main protagonist of Final Fantasy V is Bartz Klauser. This is one of my most favorite name origins. Bartz is short for Bartholomew, which means tree stump. And this seems strange until you take his last name into account, and after you've played through all of Final Fantasy V. Klauser is where we get the names Nicholas and Klaus from. Klauser means to have victory over, so Bartz's full name means victory over a tree stump, which is epic, because Exdeath was originally a tree from the Forest of Moor, sealed with evil magic. Speaking of this game's villain, Exdeath, in my interpretation, is an abbreviation for existential death, seeing as Exdeath's primary goal was to return all existence to the void, or nothingness. The main protagonist from Final Fantasy VI is Terra Branford. I was unable to find relevant information about Terra's last name, But, like most of the first names of each hero from Final Fantasy, her name has elemental symbolism. The name Terra is Latin for Earth. The one connection I can make for Terra is that she was under the mind control of the Slave Crown, a Magitech invention created by Kefka Palazzo, the game's antagonist. This is symbolic of the Gestalian Empire, and by proxy, Kefka's goal to have dominion over the entire planet. Furthermore, Terra's name symbolizes the struggle for humanity to overcome Kefka, as he has ascended to godhood. Kefka's last name, Palazzo, is Italian for the word palace. This makes sense given the final dungeon of FF6 being a grand tower. Also, Kefka's ultimate desire is to rule the planet, treating it as if it were his own palace. The name Kefka does not have an etymological origin in and of itself, but many people speculate that this name is derived from the term Kafkaesque, which is a word created to describe literature written by Franz Kafka, a novelist who wrote about darker themes imbued with oppressive and nightmarish qualities. Considering that Kefka succeeded in destroying the planet, I would venture to guess that his name is indeed inspired by these literary works. At face value, the name Cloud seems like a lazy attempt to carry on the elemental theme of protagonist names in the Final Fantasy series. And what's worse is that this name is derived from the Old English word Clud, which means a mass of rock or earth. But the word cloud is used to describe how clouds were perceived by human beings. These natural phenomena at times could look like heavenly mountains, depending on the weather, and this is most likely the reason why religious folk attributed clouds to be heavenly. According to scripture, angels resided in the heavens. The religious text of Kabbalah describes angels, the first supernatural beings created by God, as beings of emanations, which are also known as Sephiroth. And so, we have the origin of our one-winged angel, Sephiroth. The Sephiroth allowed God to manifest in the physical and metaphysical planes of existence, which is starting to make this whole FF7 remake theory about Sephiroth creating an alternate timeline to succeed in destroying Gaia sound more and more plausible. It is important to note that during the story of FF7, Sephiroth is able to control Cloud, imposing his will on our hero. This is much like how angels were artistically depicted as having dominion within the kingdom of heaven, surrounded by clouds. What is also significant is that another name for God was the name Jehovah. The name of the celestial being from which both Sephiroth and Cloud share a bond is Jenova. The name Jenova is actually a portmanteau of the words Jehovah and Nova. The word Nova is Latin for new, so Jenova literally means new God. This new God is the reason our fallen angel is able to impose his will on one of the most recognizable characters in all of Final Fantasy. Also keep in mind that the word Sephiroth literally means counting, which is probably the perfect word to describe our villain, as he is responsible for organizing the reunion, a ritual that represents the return of all Jenova clones and Jenova cells to one location. But what I love even more about the etymology of Sephiroth's name is the ancient spell Meteor, which embodies a literal countdown to the planet's demise, should our villain succeed in his mission. I have a confession to make. I've never actually played Final Fantasy VIII in its entirety, but I have read about it and have watched several videos. Squall Leonhardt, our protagonist, has a name that doesn't appear to mean anything, so my best interpretation of Squall's last name takes the meaning of lion's heart. The word Leon is Greek for the English word lion, and Griever, the ultimate guardian force, has lion-like characteristics. During the final battle with Ultimecia, the villainess is actually able to manifest Squall's idea of the most powerful guardian force from his heart and use it against him and the party. Squall's name literally describes a storm that can be hundreds of miles long. Considering this definition, the name Squall could symbolize all of time, or that which Ultimecia would like to compress and have dominion over. Ultimecia's name is another speculation of meaning. From what I know for sure, half of this name comes from the word ultimate, which means final. Ultimecia is the final sorceress, and she is prophesied to pass along her powers to a sorceress in the past. The other half of Ultimecia's name is speculated to be derived from Artemisa, the Spanish name for Artemis, the Greek goddess of hunting. If true, this description fits, as Ultimecia hunts for several sorceresses to whom she desires to pass along her powers. With Final Fantasy IX, we will start with our antagonist first, due to the chronological events that take place within this game. The setting of Final Fantasy IX begins with Terra, a dying planet, needing to find another planet to merge with in order to survive. Garland, is tasked by the Terrans with finding and merging with a host planet by any means necessary. Garland succeeds at this task when he sets his sights on the planet Gaia. The plot that follows boils down to transferring the souls of Gaia for Terran souls once the planets have merged using the Aoife tree. To accomplish this task, Garland creates the genome Kuja. Kuja is our primary antagonist, who was created to accelerate the process of transferring souls from Gaia to Terra through destructive means. Kuja performed this task by becoming a war merchant for Queen Braun, as he tried to induce as much death as possible. The name Kuja in Hindi means born of the earth. Since we know that the Latin word for earth is already Terra, this is a neat connection. In Hindu cosmogony, the name Kuja represents the planet Mars, who was considered the Roman god of war, and, like Terra, is also a red planet. And for some bonus trivia, the Tagalog word for Kuja is a formal word for older brother. When Garland discovered that Kuja's lifespan would be shorter than expected, he created a second agent of chaos to complete his goal. This second angel of death thwarts his destiny, however, and becomes our hero, Zidane. The name Zidane originates from the Arabic word Zaidan, which means to increase. I interpret this meaning to instead literally translate as to be better, because Zidane was intended to fulfill the job that Kuja could not. The final battle of this game is with Necron, which is derived from Nekros, the Greek word for death. Final Fantasy X was intended to have two protagonists, that being Tidus and Yuna. These two mirror the original summoner and her husband who defeated Sin, Yunalesca and Za'an. Za'an is the ancient name for sun in Sanskrit, and Tidus, in the Okinawa dialect of Japanese, also means sun. Yunalesca and her descendant Yuna conversely mean moon, from the word found within the Ryukyu dialect. The suffix leska, in the first summoner's name, may actually refer to the Greek word leska, which derives as defender of humanity. Several mythologies portray the sun and the moon as lovers, most notably early Japanese mythology. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, was actually married to Tsukuyomi, the moon god, for some time until the destruction of a harvest deity caused a separation between the two of them. The people of Spira know Sin to be the source of all misfortune. What they do not know is that Sin is actually a manifestation of magical armor from the powerful summoner of Zanderkin, whose name was Yevon. 1,000 years in the past, as Zanderkin was being annihilated by the powerful Machina-filled city of Bavel, Yevon summoned a powerful shell of pyreflies around himself with an incantation, and, I'm paraphrasing here, to destroy all Machina. This spell created Sin and caused Yevon to shed his humanity, therefore adopting a more parasitic bug-like form, incapable of ending the intention contained within the words of his original spell. And so, our primary antagonist, Yu Yevon, was created. The word Yu is Japanese for a spirit of the dead, a secret, or something known to be obscure or secluded. A user from an FF10 forum I stumbled upon, named Ryoko Habuki, also stated that the word Yu can mean possession. The word Yevon exists only within the realm of Final Fantasy X. However, the Japanese translation of this word is Ibon, which is actually a tetragrammaton, or a four-letter word meant to symbolize the name of God. Yes, our final boss's name literally means possession god. Interesting, right? As the player reaches the end of this game, it is revealed that Yu Yevon's magic also sustains the dream Zanderkind that Tidus is from. And so, ending Yu Yevon brings an end to Tidus as a faith, much like how killing the harvest deity separated Amaterasu from Tsukuyomi in Japanese mythology. Also worth mentioning is that it is revealed that the religion of Yevon is a lie to support the mythos behind Sin in order to help the people of Spira accept its futility. Tidus' name, being symbolic of the sun, also adopts the philosophical meaning associated with the sun itself, as the sun is meant to represent objective truth, or truth with a capital T. It is the ultimate truth of why this millennia-long conflict exists with Sin, which allows our heroes to end this destructive cycle once and for all. I cannot seem to find any etymological sources for the names Vaughn and Vane, so they appear to be the exception to the trends I am trying to depict within this video. If anyone is able to find anything about the origin of these two characters' names, please comment below and let me know. I would love to glean any information about them if there is any. The protagonist of Final Fantasy XIII is Lightning Farron. The French name for our hero is Eclair Faron. Eclair, while being a tasty French pastry, can also mean lightning. Farron consequently means thunder. So we've got Lightning Thunder for our hero's name. Well, it gets a bit deeper than this. Lightning obviously continues the elemental-themed names of the heroes for a majority of Final Fantasy games, but lightning and thunder are specifically associated with the Norse deity Thor. The primary mission of the party in FF13, who are all branded as Lucy, is to somehow transform into the monster known as Ragnarok, and fulfill the fal'Cie Barthandelis' mission to destroy Orphan, the fal'Cie responsible for keeping the planetoid of Cocoon afloat, and is also the location where the majority of humanity lives in Final Fantasy XIII. Ragnarok is known in Norse mythology as the ultimate apocalypse, and Ragnarok is brought about by none other than Thor, according to Norse mythology. The party succeeds in bringing about the destruction of Orphan after Barthandelis merges with this fal'Cie. The destruction of Orphan then brings about the end of Cocoon, causing it to impact into Grand Pulse. It is during this apocalyptic event that both Fang and Vanille are inspired to transform into Ragnarok, bringing about the salvation of our party, in addition to all of humanity. Interestingly enough, Barthandelis derives his name from Baldanders, a shape-shifting creature from German literary myth. Barthandelis gives credence to this myth by being able to transform into his fal'Cie form, take on the guise of Lightning's sister Sarah, as well as embody an extension of himself in the mechanical owl Minerva. Our most recent game in the series follows Noctis Lucis Caelum, whose adversary is Arden Lucis Caelum, his long-lost relative. The world of Final Fantasy XV is called Eos, which is the Greek word for dawn, the time that occurs just before nightfall. I only mention this word because it helps reveal the truth behind Noctis' full name. It is also important to note that Eos is plagued with consistently longer nights, and this phenomenon is known as the Star Scourge. Arden's pseudonym is Izunia, which is phonetically close to the Japanese word Izuna, meaning the least of weasels. Throughout the story of FF15, Arden coaxes Noctis into fulfilling his destiny as the true king of prophecy, sealing Noctis inside of the Empire's crystal for 10 years, and bringing about the complete advent of the Star Scourge, which then plagued the world with eternal darkness, or night. Night is when demons, the monsters of Final Fantasy XV, are at their strongest potential. At the end of FF15, Noctis succeeds in defeating Arden, and this reverses the Star Scourge, bringing light back to Eos. The name Noctis Lucis Caelum literally can be translated to mean light of the night sky. So there you have it. These are the origins of the names within each Final Fantasy game, and how those names reveal deeper meanings behind the stories in which they're involved. What did you find most interesting about this video? Did any of the names catch you by surprise? Which name stuck out the most to you? Be sure to leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed my explanations within this video, please give it a like. Or even Zidane yourself and share this video so that others can see this video and learn something new. As always, this is Wiz Catches Lightning. I will try to make more videos about the Final Fantasy series, as it is one of my favorite series of all time. If you would like to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can see my Final Fantasy content in the future. I will definitely be covering more Final Fantasy XVI as we get closer to its eventual release. And I would love for you all to be a part of that. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please be sure to comment below as well. Suggestions are always welcome, and I want to keep my videos as interesting as possible. Also, if you haven't seen my most recent video analyzing the trailer for FF16, please be sure to check that out as well. Well, what are you waiting for? Get out there and catch some lightning. Thanks for watching.